What's up, guys? Glad to have you back. YouTube hasn't been showing my videos much, so your like and comment can really help. Appreciate it. Now, let's jump into today's story. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 38 years old, a financial analyst in New York City. Numbers are my compass. I've built a career on precision, measuring risk, forecasting trends, protecting wealth. I believe money is more than just paper or digital entries on a screen. It's discipline. It's respect. It's the measure of how carefully you treat the life you've been given. For me, control isn't a cage, it's freedom. But here's the line that keeps echoing in my head. I always thought infidelity was about love. For my wife, Olivia, it started with money. From the outside, we were the kind of couple people envied. Our apartment rose above Fifth Avenue, glass walls framing the green heart of Central Park like a painting. Morning light poured in, catching the edge of Olivia's champagne flute as she posted another photo. Always perfectly angled, perfectly captioned, #blessed. She played the part of the perfect wife flawlessly, and people bought it. At dinners in Cipriani, at charity galas, at rooftop lounges where the Manhattan skyline burned against the night, she was radiant. Friends whispered we were the power couple. She liked hearing that. I liked pretending it was true. But truth has sharp edges. I've always been cautious, deliberate. I plan investments down to the decimal, triple-check every decision, and buy only what holds long-term value. Olivia? She thrives on impulse. A new Hermes Birkin in Rouge H, because red brings power. A diamond bracelet from Cartier because it's Friday, and Fridays deserve sparkle. Vacations booked with a glass of wine in her hand. Street Barts, Cabo, the Amalfi Coast, while I sat in the other room reviewing quarterly reports. I told myself this was balance, that her fire complemented my restraint. But fire, left unchecked, doesn't balance anything. It burns. At first, I dismissed it as a quirk. Some men golf too much, some gamble, some drink. Olivia spent. And yes, her charm was disarming. She'd smile, kiss my cheek, say, "Relax, Daniel. Life's short. Don't you want to enjoy it?" And I'd nod, even when the numbers on the credit card bill screamed louder than her laugh. But late at night, when the city quieted down and all that was left was the hum of traffic on Fifth and the faint glow of lights over Central Park, I would lie awake with that unease gnawing at me. Something wasn't right. Not just the spending, it was something beneath it. A hunger, a restlessness I couldn't quantify on any spreadsheet. I thought of the way she looked at other men sometimes. Not desire, not exactly. More like calculation. Like she was measuring the weight of their watch, the cut of their suit, the ease with which they signaled for another bottle of Dom Perignon. Olivia wasn't chasing love. She was chasing something bigger, shinier. And I was too naive, or maybe too trusting, to see that the person closest to me was also the person most willing to gamble with everything I'd built. Looking back, I realized the warning signs were there. The difference in how we valued money wasn't a quirk, it was a crack. And cracks don't stay small forever. They widen, they split, and eventually the whole structure collapses. At that time, though, I still believed we were unshakable. That our perfect life was just a little strained, nothing more. But the truth? The truth was that fault line was already shifting beneath us, silent, dangerous, waiting for the right moment to split open and swallow everything. And when it did, it wasn't just my marriage that collapsed. It was my entire world. From a distance, our life looked untouchable. If you scrolled through Olivia's Instagram, you'd see a curated museum of success. Central Park sunrises from our living room. Dinner plates at Nobu glowing under soft candlelight. Blurry rooftop selfies at the peninsula with the Empire State Building shimmering behind us. Her captions always read the same way. We have it all. And to anyone who didn't know better, we did. Our apartment was the kind of place that made visitors exhale when they walked in. Polished hardwood floors, walls lined with minimalist art, the city stretching endlessly beyond glass panes. Olivia would host dinner parties where she floated between guests in silk dresses, her laugh smooth as champagne bubbles. I'd stand by the bar cart, pouring wine, listening to friends whisper about how we were the definition of a power couple. I didn't argue. It was easier to let people believe the picture. But facades, by nature, are fragile. And the truth was, while I believed in investments that grew over time, Olivia believed in the rush of instant gratification. I'd watch her in Bergdorf Goodman, her eyes scanning the shelves like a predator spotting prey, and I'd think, she doesn't care what it costs. She cares that it's hers now. For me, money was security. For her, it was oxygen. It started small: handbags, shoes, weekends in Miami. I told myself it was manageable, that she'd settle down. But her appetite wasn't for things, not really. It was for the performance, the appearance of wealth, the illusion of abundance. Olivia didn't want the bag because of the leather. She wanted the photo, the look in her friends' eyes when they saw it at Cipriani, the compliments whispered across the table. There was one night I remember vividly. We were at Cipriani Wall Street, the vaulted ceilings glowing gold, violins playing faintly over the buzz of bankers and models. Olivia leaned in, clutching my arm, her new diamond earrings catching the light. She whispered, "Don't you love how they look at us? Like we're untouchable." I smiled, but something inside me shifted. Because I didn't love it. I didn't care if strangers thought we were flawless. What mattered to me was stability, paying off the mortgage, growing the portfolio, securing our future. But for her, the performance was the future. She was building a stage, not a life. I told myself it was a small difference. Every couple has them, right? One partner spends, the other saves. Yin and yang. But the truth is, it wasn't a difference. It was dynamite, waiting for a spark. And yet, I kept playing along. I kept showing up at rooftop parties, at corporate dinners, at weekend getaways in the Hamptons, wearing my tailored suits while she dazzled in gowns that cost more than my first year's rent in New York. I let the world believe the myth because admitting otherwise would have meant facing what was really happening. I used to think the most dangerous lies were the ones people tell you. But no, the most dangerous lies are the ones you tell yourself. Back then, the lie I clung to was this: that Olivia's spending was harmless, that her love for luxury was just a phase, that beneath the sparkle and the shopping bags, she still shared my values. I couldn't have been more wrong. And as much as I wanted to keep polishing that facade, deep down, I already knew the cracks were spreading. And when it broke, it wouldn't just shatter our marriage. It would expose just how much of my life had been built on a stage that was never mine. The first cracks didn't come with fireworks. They slipped in quietly, the way fog rolls down a Manhattan street. Soft at first, then suddenly you realize you can't see 3 feet ahead. Olivia had always been social, but lately she'd begun vanishing more often. She'd throw on a blazer, grab her phone, and toss out excuses that sounded rehearsed. Client dinner. Last-minute work trip to Chicago. Sometimes it was networking cocktails, don't wait up. At first, I accepted it. She did some consulting on the side, and New York thrives on those endless networking nights. But when her trips stacked up, I started keeping score. And the math didn't add up. Each return came with something new. A Louis Vuitton Neverfull, a bracelet that shimmered too brightly to be costume jewelry, a watch from Cartier that I knew hadn't come cheap. I remember one particular evening. She breezed into the apartment after a flight from Chicago, hair perfectly styled, her smile glowing like a magazine cover. She tossed her new Hermes onto the sofa like it was nothing. I studied it for a second, the way you study numbers that don't belong on your balance sheet. "Olivia," I said carefully, "how are we affording all this?" She laughed, too quick, brushing me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Don't be so uptight, Daniel. Life is short. We deserve to enjoy it." It wasn't the words that unsettled me. It was the tone. Like she wasn't just dismissing my question, she was dismissing me. That night, I sat at my desk long after she'd gone to bed. The glow of the city poured in from Central Park South, and I stared at spreadsheets that didn't comfort me the way they used to. Numbers had always told me the truth. But my wife, my partner, she was starting to feel like the one variable I couldn't control. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing details. She guarded her phone with a new intensity, clutching it like it was oxygen. She'd step into the hallway to take calls, her voice low, a laugh slipping out in tones that weren't meant for me. And when I asked her again about the spending, she doubled down. Daniel, stop analyzing everything. Can't you just live? I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I was overthinking it, that my financial instincts, the same instincts that had carried me through Wall Street storms, were just being paranoid in my marriage. But deep down, I knew better. Instincts don't lie. They whisper until you can't ignore them. The worst part wasn't even the suspicion. It was the silence between us. Dinners turned quiet. Our conversations shrank to logistics. I'd talk about investment strategies or clients, and she'd scroll through her phone, nodding absently, her mind elsewhere. And each time she left for another trip, I felt it more clearly. The life we'd built together was no longer shared. She was playing a different game, one I hadn't been invited to. Back then, I didn't have proof, only questions. But questions, left unanswered, have a way of multiplying. And soon, they were everywhere. In her smile, in the glint of a necklace, in the silence that filled our apartment long after midnight. I used to believe marriages broke with one big explosion. Now I know they can dissolve like acid, quietly, invisibly, until one day you touch the surface and realize the foundation is already gone. And though I couldn't name it yet, I knew. Olivia's world was drifting away from mine. And in that gap, something dangerous was growing. The first time Richard Hale stepped out of rumor and into my line of sight, he did it under the blue lights of the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden. Wexler and Company. Capital's annual gala, black tuxes, polished speeches, gripping grins beside a step-and-repeat. Our favorite ritual of self-congratulation. Midtown buzzed outside. Penn Station rumbling beneath us like a restless animal, but inside everything gleamed. Waiters floated by with lamb lollipops. The jazz trio eased into blue and green, and the bar poured Macallan like it was tap water. Optics mattered. Tonight, we were invincible. Olivia loved these rooms. She moved through them like she'd been born under a chandelier. Hand on my arm, smile camera ready, the kind of glow that bends conversations toward itself. I watched her tilt toward a group of VPs near the mezzanine, the satin of her dress catching the light as if the fabric had its own electricity. That's when Richard appeared, tall, bronzed, a tuxedo tailored to suggest he had been tailored to wear tuxedos. Senior leadership at Wexler, adored by the risk desk, famous for landing ugly deals and making them look like swans. They met at the foot of the staircase. Not a meeting, really, an orbit lock. Her head tipped a degree too far. His hand lingered a fraction too long. The sort of detail you can miss if you want to. I no longer wanted to. Colleagues noticed. They always do. Two associates murmured behind their napkins, "He's mentoring her?" and laughed in a way I couldn't hear, but did. Margaret Collins, board member, saw it too. She has that chess master gaze that travels 3 moves ahead. One raised eyebrow across the room told me she'd filed the moment where it belonged. I excused myself for water I didn't need and watched the floor from the balcony. Below, Olivia touched the pendant at her throat. Van Cleef and Arpels, Alhambra motifs in mother of pearl. New, unmistakably so. I hadn't bought it. She leaned to a friend by the floral wall, and, clear as bell glass, I heard, "Richard has such good taste." Funny how 5 words can sound like a door closing. He guided her through the crowd with those small, proprietary gestures. Hand at the small of the back, voice pitched low, that confident angle of a man who assumes the world will step aside. To anyone else, it could pass for collegial warmth. To a man trained by numbers, it looked like a position already opened, leverage already applied. During the CEO's speech, Olivia and Richard stood a half-pace closer than strangers do. His cuff brushed her wrist when the applause rose. She didn't move. Neither did he. Noise swelled around us. Fun performance. Market outlook. A joke about rates that landed big. I clapped with everyone else and felt nothing but the quiet click of a puzzle finding its edge. Margaret found me near the donor wall. "Strong quarter," she said, eyes on the names, not on me. Then, after a beat, careful rooms, these. A neutral sentence with teeth. I nodded once. The kind of nod that says, I see it too. When the band shifted into something brighter, I tried to pull the night back to normal. Introduced Olivia to a client from Park Avenue. Mentioned a new model we were piloting. She smiled perfectly, answered flawlessly, then drifted, magnet to magnet, back to Richard. They laughed at something I wasn't invited to. I took a slow sip of whiskey and let the burn make a memory of the moment. Here's the part one won't dress up. My heart didn't shatter. It tightened, like a fist around a coin. I've lost money before. I know the sensation of control slipping one basis point at a time. This felt like that. A drawdown you can't yet see on the chart, but you can feel it, humming under the surface. By the time dessert landed and the applause flared again, the story had changed genres. This wasn't a marital rough patch. It wasn't my overactive caution. It was a pattern with a name and a cost. Olivia's necklace gleamed. Richard's smile held. Colleagues whispered. And somewhere between the mezzanine and the bar, I decided I was done being the audience. If they were drafting a play, I would write the ending. Suspicion has a way of reshaping your life. It slips into the quiet spaces, the late-night hours when the city hums outside your window, the mornings when you sip coffee and feel her eyes slide off yours too quickly. After that gala at Madison Square Garden, I couldn't put the pieces back in their box. Richard's smile, Olivia's laugh, the necklace she swore she bought herself, it all rattled around inside me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I did what I've been trained to do. I went to the numbers. At first, I checked the personal accounts. A few unusual withdrawals, charges from boutiques I'd never heard of, hotel bills that didn't line up with her Chicago trips. Then I dug deeper. And that's when the floor began to give way. Money was missing. Not much at first, just enough to make you doubt yourself. But when I traced the transfers, the patterns sharpened. Wire transactions disguised as consulting fees, checks signed in my name with handwriting that almost, but not quite, matched my own. And it wasn't just our accounts. At the Wexler & Company office, I stayed late one evening, combing through statements. The numbers didn't line up. Accounts bled into each other. Assets were misplaced, then replaced, like someone had shaken the books and assumed no one would notice. But I noticed. I always notice. I opened a file I wasn't supposed to have access to. And there it was, my own signature on documents I'd never seen. Olivia's hand, imitating mine. Neat, practiced. Betrayal etched in ink. This was no longer about jealousy. This wasn't about late-night texts or even hotel rooms. This was theft. Fraud. A game played behind my back with stakes bigger than marriage vows. The sickest part? I realized she hadn't just been stealing from me. She was stealing from the firm. And Richard Hale, Mr. Golden Boy, was right there with her. I closed the file, sat alone in that glass office tower, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Real fear. Not for myself, but for how deep this thing went. For the first time, I wondered if the woman I'd built my life around was capable of destroying everything I had ever worked for. And the answer, buried in those numbers, was yes. Follow the money, and the noise stops. That's what I tell junior analysts when markets thrum and everyone pretends volatility is a personality trait. Cash flows don't flirt, they confess. So I treated my marriage like a forensic audit and let the numbers talk. Nights blurred in the Midtown office. Empty corridors, the air system sighing, West 52nd Street glowing below like a patient heartbeat. I built a shadow ledger beside the official one, a quiet twin. At first, it was petty fog, consulting fees to a Delaware LLC called R&H Advisory. Clean initials if you don't know Richard Hale. Then came transfers routed through a sleepy correspondent bank in Wilmington, split into precise $49,750 tranches. Too neat to be organic, too small to trip casual controls. Someone thought they were clever. I was grateful for it. The shell map unfolded like a bad tourist brochure. R&H Advisory to Morningside Ventures LP, Delaware again, into Galecrest S.A. In the BVI, then back stateside through a boutique custodian on Park Avenue. From there, the wires fanned out. One to an Olivia Brooks household account I'd never approved. Another to Hale Strategies LLC, a tidy vehicle tucked into a WeWork mailbox on Lexington. Every hop stamped with timestamps that matched Olivia's Chicago trips to the hour. The day she posted cappuccinos at the Plaza's Palm Court, a client escrow shed $199,000 into Morningside. The night she tagged a view from the roof at Public, a swift message pinged Galecrest at 12:41 a.m. I pulled e-signature logs for authorizations bearing my name. The IP addresses didn't match our office block. One resolved to Four Seasons Hotel, New York downtown. Another to the Plaza guest Wi-Fi. Same device ID across 3 approvals. The handwriting in the margin of scanned, wet ink, pages almost, but not quite mine. When fraud wears your signature, it thinks it owns your life. Funny what receipts remember. Van Cleef and our pals, 5th Avenue. Posted 2 days after an escrow sweep. Nobu 57. Private room minimums hitting the card of a shelf fed by Galecrest. A black SUV to Four Seasons. Billed to Hale Strategies. Same night, a vendor bonus bled from a Wexler subaccount. Luxury had a ledger, and it rhymed with theft. I kept my face calm at work, the way surgeons keep their hands steady. I copied nothing to company servers. Everything lived on an air-gapped drive, mirrored to a safe deposit box at a Chase branch on Madison. My browser history looked like due diligence had binge-watched insomnia. Secretary of State registries, OFAC screens, KYC anomalies, old prospectuses where Richard's name appeared as advisor a shade too often. Each breadcrumb made the story simpler. This wasn't impulse. It was architecture. Around 2 in the morning, with steam curling from the street grates and a taxi's light stuttering past, I realized the part that hurt more than the hotel rooms. When the money moved, our life moved with it. The dress at Cipriani, the ring at Cartier, the pendant she fingered at the gala, paid by accounts that weren't theirs to touch. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd laundered the feeling of us into props for a life that photographed well. I didn't call her. I didn't storm into Richard's glass corner and make a scene people would dine out on for months. I made a dossier. Transaction trees, signature overlays, IP lookups, board minutes with quiet edits, surveillance stills from lobby cams at the Plaza tied to wire timestamps. I wrote the narrative a prosecutor would prefer and the board could swallow. Then I printed 2 copies on different printers, one for fire, one for rain, and slid them into a plain manila folder that suddenly felt heavier than gold. At dawn, the park below shifted from shadow to green, and a rower cut a clean line across the reservoir. I thought about the first lesson my father taught me counting coins at our kitchen table in Queens. Money isn't about the number, it's about the promise. Somewhere between a WeWork mailbox and a BVI stamp, Olivia and Richard had broken that promise on purpose. I locked the folder. I straightened my tie, and for the first time since this began, I felt the click of control returning. Not loud, not vengeful, just precise. The trap would need a door they couldn't see and a witness who saw everything. Margaret Collins came to mind. Eyes like ledger lines, a memory for patterns, a quiet intolerance for liars. Numbers had told their story. Now it was my turn. By the time I gathered enough proof, the weight of silence was crushing me. Every dinner at our apartment overlooking Central Park became a theater. Olivia would glide in wearing something new. Always something new. And I'd set the table like a dutiful husband, my stomach turning as if every plate carried poison. She thought I was blind, or worse, that I didn't care. But I cared, more than she could ever understand. The night I finally confronted her, the city outside was alive. Horns on 5th Avenue, the hum of people spilling out of Cipriani after midnight. Inside, though, it was just us. The apartment felt too big, too polished, the glass walls pressing in. I laid the documents on the table. Wire transfers, forged signatures, emails with Richard's name typed too casually. For a moment, she just stared, the color draining from her face. "This isn't about us anymore," I said, my voice steady. "You're stealing. From me. From the firm. Her eyes hardened, like glass cutting sunlight. You never understood me, Daniel. You hoard money like it's sacred. Richard lets me live. She tried to twist it, to turn the crime into my flaw. Greed disguised as liberation. Betrayal packaged as self-discovery. She even laughed, low and bitter, as if I were the fool. That was the moment it clicked. For Olivia, this was never about love. Not even about Richard. It was about hunger, money, power, the rush of bending rules until they snapped. And me? I had been her perfect disguise. Disciplined Daniel, the financial analyst, the man who made her shine. But her shine had turned toxic. I didn't shout. I didn't throw things. I let the silence speak. And in that silence, I saw her clearly for the first time, not as my wife, but as a thief standing in the ruins of my trust. Revenge isn't a scream, it's a blueprint. I kept my voice even, my posture polite, while I sketched the end of a story that had been writing itself without me. I asked Margaret Collins to meet at the Modern, the dining room tucked beside MoMA where deals disguised themselves as lunch. She listened the way good board members do, eyes steady, questions short, letting the weight move across the table and settle where it belonged. When I slid the manila folder beside her wine glass, she didn't gasp. She nodded once, like a judge acknowledging evidence the jury will never forget. We built a clean mechanism. No gossip. No theatrics. A special committee risk review created under the bylaws, minutes drafted by outside counsel, invitations issued to Richard and, by coincidence, Olivia, whose vendor onboarding workstream now intersected with a fake SPV I named Emerald Row Partners. The bait was elegant, a mid-market credit roll-up with term sheets that looked exactly like Richard's taste in danger, polished, leveraged, and plausibly irresistible. To advance it, he'd need a compliance attestation signed by 2 officers. My signature line remained conspicuously empty. IT set a silent watch. Device IDs, IP logs, screen capture on the approval portal. We green-lighted meeting rooms on the 38th floor of our Midtown Tower and let calendar invites do the whispering. Meanwhile, I salted the trail with habits I knew too well. An edit timestamp landing at the Plaza's Rose Club hour, a follow-up file seeded to open cleanly on Four Seasons downtown Wi-Fi. If they were creatures of luxury, then luxury would be the net. Olivia made it easy. She'd always loved the choreography of success, the click of stilettos through a lobby, the concierge's smile that says "Welcome back, Mrs. Brooks." My alert pinged when the forged Daniel B. signature hit the queue from an IP block registered to the plaza. Same device fingerprint as the prior authorizations, the O in my name curling like hers, a flourish I never use. 10 minutes later, Richard's counter-signature arrived from his corner office, bold and confident, the way men write when they think the tide obeys them. Margaret and I met again, this time at Bimmelman's Bar in the Carlisle, where the lamps make every decision look vintage. She'd already engaged a forensic firm. Their report fit in 12 lean pages that felt like thunder. Wire paths, shell ladders, vendor shells using WeWork mail drops on Lexington. Transaction times hugging Olivia's travel posts like shadows. We proceed swiftly, Margaret said, and it wasn't a question. I went home and practiced silence. Olivia floated in late from drinks at the Skylark, the skyline shining off her cheekbones as if the city were proud of her. I poured her sparkling water, let her talk about a dress she didn't need, and filed the moment under exhibits the board will never see. The hero in me wanted to shout. The professional in me tightened the bolts. Justice shouldn't wobble. 2 days later, our assistant sent a bland memo. Special committee session, Thursday, 8:30 a.m., conference level. I added one line of my own. Please bring laptops for live review. Richard replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Olivia hearted it, as if we were planning a surprise party. In a way, we were. That night, I walked the reservoir path in Central Park and counted lamplights like breaths. I thought about my father at the kitchen table in Queens, rolling quarters into paper sleeves and telling me money is just a promise with a serial number. I thought about how easily people tear promises when they think the paper won't remember. Then I thought about Margaret's expression, calm, surgical, and the way the folder felt in my hands, heavier than any ring I'd ever put on. The trap wasn't about spectacle. It was about giving the truth a microphone and the thieves a front row seat. On Thursday, the door would close, the screen would wake, and the numbers would speak in a voice no one could charm. I didn't need rage. I needed timing. And timing, finally, was on my side. The boardroom was glass and steel, 38 stories above Midtown, the kind of place built for power plays. The city spread beneath us like a chessboard, and for once, I felt like the player, not the pawn. Margaret Collins sat at the head of the table, her gaze sharp, her expression unreadable. To her left, Richard Hale adjusted his cufflinks, relaxed, too confident. And Olivia, my Olivia, sat beside him, polished as ever, her smile calm, almost smug. They thought this was routine, a review, a formality. I stood, manila folder in hand, and slid it across the table. The screen behind me lit up. Wire transfers, IP logs. Shell companies are stacked like Russian dolls. My signature forged, Olivia's handwriting curling through the margins. Each slide was a dagger, and I twisted it slowly. The room fell silent except for the hum of the projector. Richard leaned forward, voice rising. This is a setup. Olivia followed with venom. He was always cheap, always controlling. Don't believe him. But Margaret didn't flinch. The documents don't lie, she said, her tone like ice. I let them squirm. Let them taste the panic that had lived in me for months. Colleagues who once envied us now watched Olivia with open disgust, Richard with thinly veiled contempt. The power couple's mask cracked in real time, their empire collapsing under the weight of truth. By the end, there was no applause, no victory lap, just silence. Olivia's eyes, once so bright with ambition, now glared at me with something colder than hate, the recognition that she had finally lost. And for the first time in years, I felt free. They walked Richard out first. Security, quiet and polite, the way New York does decency when it's really doing distance. His smile had collapsed into paperwork, a resignation drafted by outside counsel, a laptop surrendered, a badge that blinked red when it touched the turnstile. Olivia followed 10 minutes later, still flawless, still upright, but the gloss had turned brittle. Margaret didn't raise her voice, she raised thresholds. Compliance referred the matter to regulators. Legal froze the vendor shells. Our bank flagged Galecrest. Somewhere between Lexington and the BVI, the oxygen ran out. Divorce moved fast when facts did the talking. The forged signatures, the hotel IPs, the escrow leaks. No grand speeches, just dates and decimals. We settled the apartment on Central Park South because I wanted the view to outlast the memory. I sold the Van Cleef pendant at Christie's and returned the proceeds to the client account it had bled from. A neat little circle the auditors would admire. Richard's thumbs-up emojis became subpoenas. Olivia's friends discovered how quiet group chats get when the bottle stops coming. At work, I rebuilt the rails, segregated approvals, air-gapped signers, a vendor attestation that made vanity projects break out in hives. Margaret offered me a seat on the risk committee. I took it, not for the title, but for the clean arithmetic of prevention. Nights were stranger. You don't just step out of a life. You step into echoes. The untouched espresso cups at Sant Ambrius. The table at Cipriani where the violinist still nods as if you belong. I learned to leave early. One evening, I walked from Columbus Circle down the mall to Bethesda Terrace, past couples carving their own fragile futures into September air. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud. Closure is quiet. Somewhere on West 72nd, a saxophone stitched the city together, and, for a moment, I believed in new beginnings. No fireworks, just steady light. Did I miss her? I missed the promise we counterfeited together. But promises, like money, have serial numbers. And mine still add up. Tomorrow I'll box the last of her dresses for consignment and finally take the photos down. Then I'll get coffee, open my laptop, and do what I've always done. Protect value, respect risk, make the numbers tell the truth. Money is not about handbags or parties. Money is respect. And those who don't respect it lose everything.